Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of Mazza's Musings. We've got a really great episode for you today. I am joined by Greg Cameron, who's a Westfield native, a veteran of the Western Mass sports reporting scene with me, and we talk all things NFL draft in what turned into a 4-part series. Now our conversation really revolved around that next group of players outside of those top players that everybody is talking about. Those players that help round out your roster and really help you build depth, continuity, and just really good roster construction. There's a lot of talent in some areas of this draft. Wide receiver is one of them. And we get into all of that. The first episode, which we're launching today, features the quarterbacks and the defensive linemen. Next week, while I'm on vacation, we'll have another segment for you that includes the running backs, linebackers, and wide receivers. While we only touch on 2 position groups in this first segment, we really covered a lot of ground. It's a lot of fun. Listen in. So, before we get started on the NFL draft talk, if we're talking NFL, we can't not talk about the incident that happened in Kansas City this past week. Now, we're seeing a lot of stories come out about the heroism of those who helped subdue the perpetrators, and that is truly amazing, and hats off to those people. But the fact of the matter is, I'm getting really tired of regularly having to hear about tales of heroism related to incidents of gun violence. America has a gun problem and a gun violence problem. Now, I am not one who is opposed to responsible gun ownership. I don't own a gun, and that's a choice that my family has made. But I respect those who responsibly own firearms for the purpose of personal protection, sport, and hunting. What I cannot understand is anybody who does not see that with all of these issues that we have, the one common theme is the ready access to guns. Now, gun violence is not a black and white issue. It is multifaceted and complex. And I know that multifaceted and complex doesn't fit well into a 280 character social media post. And unfortunately, that is what the conversation around this plague on our country has devolved into. What I can say is it is very clear that common sense gun laws are a foundational piece to the solution. I'm not saying that gun laws are going to solve all of our problems. But ready access to firearms, more often than not, is a contributing factor to the dismay that we witness on far too regular a basis. Now, of course, that needs to be coupled with serious conversations about our approach to law enforcement, about how we disrupt other means of access to weapons. It requires looking into and having serious conversations about the socioeconomic aspects of many of these crimes. And also, the mental health aspect. We've seen that gun violence takes many different forms, and there isn't one solution for it. So we need to have real conversations instead of digging trenches on one side or another that are based on social media posts and sound bites. My hometown of Springfield, Massachusetts, has been no stranger to gun violence. This past year, we experienced a record number of murders, and the vast majority of those were gun violence incidents. It needs to change. It needs to stop. And how it stops is by having real contemplative discussion and collaboration, because quite frankly, I'm tired of kissing my wife and daughter before they head off to school and wondering if that's going to be the day. And I'm tired of being in public places and having to think about where I'm going to go if something happens, how I'm going to protect my family. That isn't a healthy way to live. And that's the way we're living in America in 2024. Now that I've gotten that off my chest, let's talk some football.
All right, here I am with the encyclopedic mind of Greg Cameron, ready to talk some football.
Absolutely.
It's a great time. The coaches just got in the room together today. Mike Reese reported that today. You know, we got the list of who's invited to the combine. Things are really starting to come together here. I'm excited.
Same here, Chris. I think what's really great about this year's draft class is that I think there's certainly a lot of unheralded players, certainly who could be great finds, especially for the Patriots. I think what I tried to do with sort of my list of players was sort of to think about where they could fit kind of within the puzzle pieces of kind of both the traditional Patriots thinking with a little bit of potentially what this new team could look like. I think, for instance, it's a lot easier on defense to think about that. And then with kind of an offense, with certainly a huge offensive shift, certainly compared to the Earhart Perkins offense that they've been running, I don't know, since I was in the 7th grade. And I'm a 36-year-old man now, so it's certainly been a hell of a long time. But I think for me, it's going to be very interesting to sort of hear your thoughts, certainly when it comes to offensive players, especially with the first position group that we're going to talk about here with quarterbacks.
Excuse me, I talked a little bit about this already, but basically we're looking at everybody's talking about those top tier guys. You know, everybody's talking about what the Patriots are going to do at 3, or and all that kind of stuff. So when you're filling out a roster, you're not just looking at those top 3 guys. You're looking at the guys that are going to fit what you do and fill niche roles. And so one of the things that I found interesting as part of this process was when we first talked about doing this and we first started like developing our lists and everything, they didn't have an offensive coordinator. They didn't have their coaches figured out. It hadn't been reported that Elliot Wolf was going to be the de facto general manager. So a lot has changed since we even started talking about this and developing how this is going to look. And I'm curious as to how that kind of played into the way that you develop things.
So I did a little bit of to kind of quote Death Cab for Cutie a little bit, a curious case of head versus heart. But I think also at the same point, like trying to kind of combine like a sort of Elliot Wolf's thinking in terms of like player development from his Green Bay years. For instance, with like running backs, I thought about how Green Bay, how they always just seem to find the next guy and have that next guy like ready to go, like a Pez waiting to be taken out of the dispenser. You know, they've always had it with Eddie Lacy to then, to guys like Aaron Jones, and then now it's A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones. But it seems like ever since I was a kid, they've always just had the next running back since, I'm trying to think of like Amon Green going back
Right.
all the way back that far, that they always just seem to have the guy like Dorsey Levens. It was Levens, then Green, and then all these different running backs. So I felt like certain position groups I could think about. You have Ramondre Stevenson, who's got 1 year left going into this year, I believe. And then I think you have to just try and find.
And he's coming off of injury.
Exactly. So I think I looked at certainly the running back position in a way of if something, it was a lot of kind of like logic problems of if this happens, then what? And I think for a lot of different positions, I think quarterback's interesting. I looked at quarterback I made this list pretty much without knowing about AVP, Alexander Pelt, and TC McCartney, and kind of the system that they were going to run. I did it with the mindset of they wanted somebody who could do sort of that Shanahan McVay type of offense. So for me, I looked at it sort of in 3 phases. I looked at it as somebody who could probably start right away, somebody you could kind of sit for a while, and then somebody if you sign a Baker Mayfield type or a Kirk Cousins type that you could stash for a while.
Mm-hmm.
So that's sort of how I looked at a lot of these different projections and kind of choices on my end. I don't know about you.
No, I think that there was quite a balance between, heart picks. There are some heart picks, and I think you know at least who a couple of them are. But but there was a lot of, especially there was some tweaking of this as more started coming out about who was going to be on these coaching staffs, beyond coordinator down to, who the position coaches were. So there has been a lot of tweaking but there were some of my guys who I've fallen in love with that I can't quit.
Same, and I think you know a few of them from mock drafts that I've shared with you, and that players that we've talked about, sort of even dating all the way back to bowl season, of guys that there are a lot of players on this are guys that I just like, and I think that there are players that any coaching staff could figure out, how I could use that player in the position that they're in.
So now we're looking at guys who are outside of the top three, the consensus top three, and what we've been basing this off of is the consensus big board, or at least what I've been basing this off of is the consensus big board for mockdraftdatabase.com, which really has curated a bunch of the top mock drafts and big boards to compile what I think is a pretty accurate representation of where things fall. So it really depends. It's interesting because it depends on the position group. Wide receiver is really deep, so you're looking at a guy who's not in the top three, who still very well could, be off the board before the Patriots are picking in the second or third round. So, those were some of the things that were interesting for me. It's like, well, do I put this guy on my list? Because he's probably not really an option, unless they were to make a drastic move. So there were some of those where I was kind of weighing what I'd want versus what is realistic, That's always an interesting balance whenever you're doing a mock draft. It's like, am I mocking what I would want? Or am I mocking what I think they're going to do? Because those can be two wildly different things.
And I think that's the hardest thing about doing mock drafts, is that you kind of have to weigh, like, oh, well, I really like, player X, but I think the Patriots and what they want to do, they would go for players Y and Z given this same kind of conundrum. So for me, I did kind of a mix of both players I like and players that I think would fit.
Fair enough. All right. So we're going to get into the quarterbacks first. I'm going to run through everybody pretty much knows who the top three quarterbacks are, but just, for the exercise, top three quarterbacks, Caleb Williams, USC, Drake May, North Carolina, Jaden Daniels, LSU. Outside of those guys, who are our favorite quarterbacks in this draft? Do you want to kick us off?
Sure. I'm going to go with the first guy that I had on my list. I think he might be a guy on yours, because this was a player that we talked about a whole heck of a lot all season. And that's the quarterback of the University of Washington, Michael Penix Jr. Big lefty, but according to Scott Zolak this afternoon, a little lean, which makes me love him more, because if Zolak doesn't quite love him, I think that makes me like him a little bit more. But, he's an experienced guy. He played 6 years in college. He obviously had the knee injuries both at Indiana and at Washington. I just think he's the kind of quarterback that if the Patriots do what's rumored and take, a guy like a Joe Alt at 3 or a tackle or a wide receiver, he's the perfect guy to either hope that's at 34, or the kind of guy who you could trade back into the first round and take, and probably feel pretty confident in the player that you're getting.
Yeah, I co-sign on Michael Penix 100%. A couple of the things that I really like, people don't talk a lot about the amount of swagger that he has, and I think that's such a big thing, especially for that position, and there's a real confidence that he carries, and it's pretty clear that it's not false bravado, You heard that a lot recently about Mac Jones, how there was but it didn't feel genuine. But that's not what we hear about Penix, and I think that's a big thing that is probably going to come through, at the combine when he's meeting with teams and things like that. So that's something that honestly could improve his stock, so that if the Patriots did go that that route, they may have to trade into the first round to get him. I think that that's just a really underrated aspect of that position.
And I think too, one of the things that really sticks out is I remember how he played in that year that I think he led Indiana University to he probably could be good with the hat and the whip, but Indiana to 8 wins in I believe 2019 where they beat Ohio State. And I think it's so hard to win in Bloomington.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably really hard to win in Seattle too, especially in against a lot of the blue bloods in both of those conferences. And I think coming into this situation, I think you need somebody who's experienced a little bit of adversity and I think been able to really rise above it.
Medicals are obviously going to be a big part of where he goes. If we get the Juju Smith-Schuster report on the knees that they're ticking time bombs, that throws a whole nother thing into the mix, and you have to really consider what you're looking to invest in that. But at the same time, this is a guy who he makes all the throws, and he makes them look easy. I mean, people hate the lefty, but there are some videos out there where they flip it around, and he does have a little bit of an unorthodox throwing motion, but he gets it out so quick. Like his release is so it's a little. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but it reminds me of a little of Rivers. How it was a little odd, but it just rocketed out of the hand. But it rockets out of the hand, but on an intermediate pass, he's also not throwing it a million miles per hour and trying to throw it through guys. Like he understands how to vary that that velocity and touch on the ball. So there's so much to like about the way he throws the football.
Totally, and I think that that's something that you can love about Michael Penix. You and I were messaging a lot during that Washington-Oregon game earlier in October, and that game was stress-inducing. That was the uncut gems of a college football game that I watched all year, and I think watching him in that game, I felt a little bit less nervous as somebody who was kind of rooting for Washington because they hadn't and certainly been in the upper echelon of college football teams since the year where they went to the playoffs in 2016, I believe. And I think he just seems so cool, calm, and collected, which again is an attribute that certainly we haven't seen from Mac Jones, and definitely didn't see it from Bailey Zappi last year. So I think somebody with that kind of just cool, calm, collected nature is another thing that I feel like Elliott Wolf and Matt Groh and company can definitely look at.
So we both agree on Michael Penix. I'm not going to push back on you at all. So we're going to call that number one. We can check that one up. So I'll take the next one, even though I piggybacked on your Michael Penix here, and I'm going straight to my fun guy. Okay, this is a guy that is basically it's all tools. He's a total project. Talked briefly about him earlier, when I shared a mock draft with you. It's Joe Milton from Tennessee. He's the guy can throw it over them mountains, and at the same
time,
he's
Uncle Rico.
He's Uncle Rico who's going to run a 4.5 at the combine. So
right.
he's obviously a total project, but the tools are just so tantalizing. One of the things that unlike Penix, he's one of those guys who is trying to throw the ball a million miles per hour every time. And sometimes that means that he can throw it into a tight window that you think there's no way that ball's getting through there. And it does. But then you have things where then it's not even like he's trying to throw it into a tight window. He tries to throw it into a window that's not there. He tries to throw it through a wall and it ends up getting intercepted. So, if he can develop more recognition and appreciate that while he has these special tools that he needs to rein them in a bit and, trust his trust instinct a little bit more and trust what he's reading with the defense, he could be a lot of fun. Granted, this is one of those things. He's a day 3 pick, the Patriots don't have as much latitude to gamble. Like I'm usually one who's just like, day 3 picks. Yeah. Have some fun, throw some darts, the Patriots need to be a little bit more surgical and precise with their late round selections because there are just so many holes and such a lack of depth in so many places. But if this guy's sitting there, I would have a hard time just looking past what he offers physically to just, dismiss him out of hand.
He reminds me a little of another SEC quarterback who came out in the last couple of years, to a degree, not certainly to the degree in which this player got drafted a year ago, but Anthony Richardson, of a guy who just has tools out the wazoo. But I think the thing is he's a little bit of a wild horse, a little bit. Like I feel like he just has so much different talent that a lot of guys in this draft don't have, but he just can't harness it. He's the kid in Mighty Ducks 2 who doesn't know how to stop. He has all of these awesome attributes, but just can't quite harness it. And I think he'd be an awesome project. He's the complete opposite of Hendon Hooker, who he sat behind at Tennessee, where Hendon Hooker was a pretty classic quarterback in a spread system. But I think Milton just has so much unbridled talent that doesn't have any control over it. He's the relief pitcher who can throw 103, but doesn't know where the hell it's going. And I think for the Patriots, he'd be the perfect kind of stash he'd be the perfect understudy for Jacoby Brissett. For Jacoby Brissett, or a good veteran quarterback who knows that, hey, your time is coming. I'm the guy to watch the store until you're old enough to watch it. So I think he's an awesome prospect. Not on my list though. Next on my list is a guy that you and I have talked about. And this guy is my quarterback draft crush. Again, a lot like Milton, he has tools galore, despite the fact that he does not have size. That player is Spencer Rattler from the University of South Carolina, who was a top prospect going into college at Oklahoma, kind of famously lost his starting job at Oklahoma to Caleb Williams, who's going to go first overall in the first round. And but what I love about Spencer Rattler is, yeah, he's small, but at the same point, he has arm talent for days. Did you know in 2020, in COVID year, he had a 92.6 PFF grade. The only players he was behind in that regard were Justin Fields, Zach Wilson, and Michael McCorkle-Jones.
Okay, you're not making a great case for yourself, right?
I know I'm not, but again, as a mid-round guy, especially if you sign a Brissett, or even you sign a Baker Mayfield, who size-wise is pretty comparable. And he was the Senior Bowl MVP, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how he tests in Indianapolis at the Combine. He was one of the 231 athletes who were on that list, but I just wonder what his testing scores are going to be like and how he interviews. It's been in college quite a long time. And I think I would just love to see what other teams think about him, and especially how after he tests, I can look past the size thing. I can. I mean, you've seen smaller quarterbacks play pretty well. Look at, the best small quarterback that I can remember is Drew Brees. I'm not comparing him apples to apples to Drew Brees, but I think size isn't necessarily a huge factor when it comes to quarterback play, especially if it's a guy who can run a little bit, which Rattler does have some pretty good wheels. Especially if you've seen the video where he gets tackled and then spun around like a helicopter that was all over College Game Day a couple years ago. But I just think he'd be a great kind of long-term project, a lot like Joe Milton, that I think could just use a little bit more marinating, a little bit more seasoning in a professional quarterback room.
Yeah. As we've talked about, my concern is the size. I think that this is one of those things that, especially with what the Patriots are dealing with their line composition and the uncertainty there. Now, it could end up being that they draft Joe Alt at 3, and they build a line that can hold up. But I wonder with a guy like that and with his size, how much you're going to have to create for him because of his size and, being able to see over the line. How much is the offense is going to be predicated on bootlegs and, things that moving him keeping him on the move and outside of the pocket. And while that works in some ways, it also limits what you can do offensively in some ways. So there's pros and cons to that. I'm not against against the mid-round pick if that's where it goes. I just the size is the concern element for me, and exactly how he tests. They list him at I think they list him at like 6'1", 210 or something like that. There is no way he's not 6'1" and he's not 210. So
I think there's no way he's 210.
So
I'll go with the safer bet. There's no way he's 210 pounds.
How he measures and how he tests is going to be a big thing. And I think that some people knock him a little bit. They're just like, well, he lost his job, so he he took his ball and went home and went somewhere else. That's college football these days. Like that's what it is. So yeah. I don't really knock him for that the way that, some people did. And it's just, oh, he's a crybaby. He lost his job. So he took his ball and went home. That's college football these days. You're looking for the next opportunity because you don't know where it's going to come from. So, I don't hold that against him.
And he was good on a pretty atrocious South Carolina team. Shouts to Shane Beamer for how bad that South Carolina team is.
All right, so I'm going to profess that I'm going to be a self-professed hypocrite here because my next pick is an undersized guy.
Oh, really?
Jordan Travis, Florida State.
He was my third guy because yes. I'd love to hear your reasoning and then I'll tell you mine.
I loved a lot of what I saw that he did at Florida State. Florida State was one of the best teams in the country, so that certainly helps. But he was such a big part of that. He's a little small. He's not the greatest, quote unquote, arm talent, but he just had this ability he had that playmaking ability that's not only a physical thing, but like his ability to recognize what was happening in front of him and, always seemed to have that, break glass in case of emergency, option that, that he was aware of was there and he could make it work. So I think that a lot of it with him that I liked was cerebral. What I saw of him really impressed me in terms of the way that he was able to process the game. And I think that, especially when you're smaller, is much more. And that's why Drew Brees was Drew Brees. I mean, it was the things beyond his physical abilities that made Drew Brees a great quarterback. Now, again, I'm not saying Jordan Travis is going to be, Drew Brees, but especially where he's going to go in this draft, probably. He's someone that would be, again, that project, somebody who sits behind the veteran and, I hate the term learns the system, but learns how the NFL works and how NFL defenses look and how the speed is different from the NFL. To me, he's a prime candidate for that kind of pick.
I agree. I had in my notes, I'll read you what my notes say. This is my quote unquote signed a trustworthy veteran and stashed a guy a while pick. When he's healthy, Jordan Travis was electric, but his knee injury was a real blow to his draft prospects. I compare him a little bit just in terms of the situation to a guy like Hendon Hooker, that he could be a treat for somebody later on than when he probably would have gone in this draft. I think giving him a year or two to sit would be a pretty good idea for a guy like that. I think what I saw of Florida State last year, I saw him being the engine that ran that offense. And I think if he can bring some of that electric ability to the NFL, he'll be successful. But it's all a matter of if he's going to be able to overcome kind of the adversity of his size and his injury history.
We're going to try to get into the defensive linemen now. We're going to switch from offense to defense, kind of to make sure that we're giving both sides some equal time here. So when I'm thinking defensive linemen, I'm looking at guys who primarily have their hands in the dirt. So you can have a defensive end who's a defensive lineman if he's a guy who puts his hand in the dirt. I don't consider Dietrich Wise an edge. I consider him a defensive lineman who plays defensive end. as opposed to like a Matthew Judon who's standing up 98% of the time. So that's where I kind of drew the line with that.
Yeah, I did sort of the same kind of thing. I one of my players was compared pretty favorably to a guy like Keon White, who I feel like is a chess piece that you move kind of all over the defensive front. So I think for my mindset, I did a little bit of kind of mixing sort of defensive end types who are much more kind of the bigger type of defensive end that the Patriots have always had, mixed with some defensive tackle pieces.
The consensus top three were Jerzon Newton, USC, Byron Murphy, Texas, and Darius Robinson from Mizzou. So the first guy that I'm just going to say that when it comes to defensive linemen, I'm looking for like physical specimens. I'm looking for those, for those freaks, So the first guy that I went with, he's also on top of being an athletic freak, he's the son of an All-Pro. And that's Chris Jenkins from Michigan. The guy, he's just such a strong run defender, who he's just eats up double teams. And I think that that's something that, especially with some of those guys like the Godshows and the guys who are getting older, and their contracts may end up causing some kind of movement with them. He can create those one-on-ones for a guy like Barmore, who hopefully, knock on wood, some of that money that is being shifted away from, say, if they move on from a Gotcha is going towards a Barmore. But I'm getting off topic here. He's just one of those guys, like he can be that physical guy who just demands attention and frees up other guys. And that is something that I think Gerard Mayo really values. I think that he wants to make sure that he can let his linebackers loose.
Absolutely. I love the pick. I think Jenkins was one of the great players on that Michigan defense. And I think especially a thing that you can't discount. His father was a great player too. So I think he got a front row seat to what it takes to play that position at such a high level growing up. And I think a thing that the Patriots would love to do is to sort of have, somebody to be Barmore's running mate. You saw a lot during the real dynastic Patriots years in the first half of the dynasty that you would have, the Ted Washingtons, the Vince Wilforks in the middle, and then you always had sort of like the Ty Warren types right next to him. And I envision Keon White being the next like Ty Warren. I know that there's a lot of Richard Seymour comparisons that go with him, but I think to be able to get kind of a big guy to go with a bigger body guy to go with Barmore, I think would be an awesome choice for the Patriots, especially if they go for a defensive lineman. So I did this before the Senior Bowl. So I had a guy who's now in the top three, but I'm going to sort of break our rules a little bit. And the guy that I'm talking about is Darius Robinson from Missouri. And I really liked him going into the Senior Bowl, and then he was just an absolute world eater in Mobile. And I think it's interesting sort of where he's going to fall in this draft, I think, because I think there are a lot of teams that could probably use him in a NASCAR package, like what the Giants used to have. Sorry to bring up the 2000s Giants, but sort of that had that kind of package of guys who could just do everything. And I think he's got big size. I saw that he was comped really favorably to a guy like a Keon White. So I sort of look at him as that kind of Keon White, like Bash brother, like the Bash brother for Keon White. It's probably not a big need for this team. I think definitely a luxury, especially with this coaching staff, with a guy like Jerry Montgomery coaching the defensive line. I think he'd be such a great luxury for them, but I definitely don't see like a full need for another defensive lineman. But man, after watching him in Mobile, I was watching him in the Senior Bowl being just like, oh no, that's the guy. That guy is just a force. And if there's any way that Gerard Mayo can somehow luck into that guy, take him. Well, I broke the rules, I know, but
that's you defended it, so I'll let it slide.
I'll run the penalty lap.
So the next guy I've got is Mason Smith from LSU. He's a guy, another one of these really physical freak kind of guys. He's 6'6", 315 pounds. He's played all over the line. he's probably not better and further along in his development at this point because he has had some injuries. You know, he had an ACL tear in 2022, you know, so that cost him time. You know, some outlets at various points compared this guy to Calais Campbell and Chris Jones. Now, I don't, you know, at this point, I don't think he's close to that, but even a discount version of that is something I think that, you know, Covington and Mayo and can work with for sure.
Yeah, I think the weird thing is that LSU defense just was not good. But he was
The
one of the
pieces
he
were
was one of
good.
the pieces were good, but I think the scheme just was a kind of a trash scheme. And I think for a player like that to, you know, to really shine in that defense is such an amazing thing to do, especially on a defense that just seemed like a little bit of an island of misfit toys. And I think the Patriots could absolutely use a guy with that size at that position. Guys at that size don't grow on trees. They just don't. So I think he'd be an awesome fit for what Montgomery and Mayo really want to do with this defense. So my second guy is kind of the answer to a trivia question I didn't even know that my brain wanted. Did you know that they can trade players at the Senior Bowl, like day of the game? Turns out they can. And so this year, Florida State's Braden Fisk got traded the day of the Senior Bowl. And I'm just going to list you off some of his stats. He's a pretty highly touted three technique, played at Florida State. Here are his stats this year: 191 tackles, 93 of them were solo tackles, 36 of those were tackles for loss. He had 19 and a half sacks, 3 passes defended, 3 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries. Now, the old Patriots axiom was the more you can do, right? I don't know what else Braden Fisk can do, especially in a defense like this. And he just seems like the exact right kind of player to do a little bit of everything.
I'm sorry, I think I blacked out there for a minute. I was just, you know, picturing that happening, and it was I think I just had a moment. So
Yeah. In the Senior Bowl, he was awesome. It was great.
Okay, now that I've had a moment to compose myself after thinking about that last pick, I'm gonna go with, and I'm sorry, I'm butchering this name, and we were talking about how we needed a pronunciation guide, and I just ran out of time before putting it together. Rook Horo. I know I butchered that, from Clemson.
Great pick. He was on my list, but he wasn't on my list.
Just so productive, you know. He's just so fast and agile for somebody who's 6'4", 290. There's obviously some inexperience there in terms of he hasn't been playing the game very long. I think he was, you know, a junior in high school when he first started playing football, but he's only 22. So in a draft where you're seeing a lot of, you know, the COVID holdovers, the 5th and 6th year seniors, this is a guy who's you know, young and has a high ceiling, and those are kind of guys that I'm willing to take a swing at.
Absolutely. I think especially coming from a program like Clemson, who for the last several years has absolutely just created just dudes at every position, which certainly seems like. I think what I love about that pick from you is that I think Rook could just be a guy that starts from day one, whoever picks him. And I just feel like the guys that, you say what you want about Dabo Swinney, and trust me, the things that you can say about Dabo Swinney are certainly multiplicative. But what I love about that program is that they just create just great NFL players at that program. You know, I go all the way back to one of my favorite athletes that I interviewed when he was still in high school, Christian Wilkins. And I feel like Christian Wilkins is exactly that same type of guy who just whatever the program asked of him, he did. And whatever it was that the Clemson coaching staff asked of that player, did it well, and did it without complaint. So I feel like that's an awesome pick, and just a guy who's just going to be solid. My third pick is a bit of a project, but you can definitely see that there's talent there, and that is Michael Hall Jr. from Ohio State.
I love that one.
In 2023, as a junior, played in 11 games, which translated to 368 snaps. In total, he recorded 14 tackles, six of them were 6 assists while making 14 stops. And I think as a pass rusher, you can definitely see the potential there. Had 26 total pressures, including 19 quarterback hurries, 5 hits, and 2 sacks on the year. The Ohio State defense was it's weird. They always seem to produce pretty good players, but not necessarily great players out from the onset. And that even dates back to the Tressel years. Maybe that's a little bit of sort of that thinking of guys like Vernon Golston as defensive ends who just don't pan out. But I just feel like, Michael Hall Jr. was, every time I watched Ohio State, it seemed like he was just in the middle of something and was always just the guy that the offensive line had their eye on more than just about anybody else, at least along the line, and not counting the linebackers, who I'm sure we'll talk about later on. But I think them just getting a guy from a blue chip school later on in the draft is somebody who can kind of grow with the program that Mayo's trying to develop here. Certainly wouldn't be something that I would kind of give them shade for.
No, and I think one of the questions with him is, how much of his opportunity was, created by others on the defense. But I think that this is why, a late round stab at him is something that sounds good, because what the Patriots been really good at is finding situations where people are going to be able to maximize what they're doing. And as much as, people want to talk about, well, ding dong, the witch is dead, Belichick's out of here. I have a hard time believing that Gerard Mayo is going to have a significantly different defensive approach in terms of leveraging the strengths of his players. And so I think that, this guy, with what he's shown, especially if he continues to develop, could develop into one of those situational, rotational guys that have been so important to those strong defenses in the past.
Absolutely. And I think of, as you were talking about that, I was trying to think of guys who were late round defensive line, finds for them, even if they were short-term finds. And the guy I thought about was Brendan Dedrick, who was, for a while, was pretty darn good. And I think, and he was like a 6th, 7th round guy out of Alabama, I think. So I think that they can find these guys in the draft. They've shown the propensity to do it. So I wonder if you get a guy from a big school who was a rotational piece there and just see what you can kind of mold that player into. So that's why I really like Michael Hall as part of this exercise that we've been doing tonight.
So I want to apologize because I skipped over an important part of what we're doing here. With the quarterbacks, we totally skipped over, and it's on me. I apologize.
I feel like we should call this, for each position group, the Gary Brown Memorial List of Favorite Sports Names Award. I know it's very wordy. We're working on that in the writing department here at the Football Minds. But I think if we want to do this, because I think it's just a great way to talk about players who might not have the kind of pub that a lot of the players, even the players that we're talking about. But I think we want to give some really just great, fun names some notoriety here. So if you want to begin with who you chose at quarterback, by all means.
All right. So for quarterback, I went with John Rice Plumlee. That just strikes me as, from UCF. Honestly, it strikes me as like a made for TV football movie name.
When you say John Reese Plumlee, I think of a lot of the great Kenneth Branagh films that my wife loves watching, kind of these like Pride and Prejudice type films. And that just sounds like a Jane Austen kind of name to me. John Reese Plumlee. Like, I feel like he's from a very upper class family from, Trenton on Thames or something. So I feel like he's either, definitely sounds like a quarterback for sure, but also could definitely get some work in kind of Jane Austen and Shakespearean productions further down the line after football is over.
All right. So who did you have for quarterbacks to honor Gary Brown?
Okay. I took a player who was at a bunch of schools, but has matriculated from Brigham Young University, and that is Keaton Slovis. I feel like somebody, has got to hold it down for the Bluto Blutarski types, like Slovis is done. And I just feel like Keaton Slovis is it's such a random name, and it rolls off the tongue really well. Who knows if he even gets drafted? Again, he was at USC. Did he go USC, Pitt, BYU? I think
Something like that.
It was weird. Yeah.
Truthfully, I can't say that I did much of my homework on Mr. Slovis.
Again, Keaton Slovis, best of luck to you, but heck of a name.
All right, so for defensive line, I'm just going to throw it back to you while I'm scrolling back down to that.
Okay, mine was for a defensive lineman from the University of Alabama, and his name is Monkel Goodwine. Just what a great surname, Goodwine. Like I feel like he's going to be a player, that just gets better with age as he kind of goes through the NFL process. So my pick for the Gary Brown Award is for defensive lineman is Monkel Goodwine.
And it sets itself up for so many headlines. It's just chef's kiss.
It reminds me a lot of like the headlines that our good friend Jason Remillard would write in the Republican offices many years ago. I just feel like that's exactly the kind of guy that he's gonna be like, oh, he has a standout game. I'm putting his name in print, baby.
All right. So for me, I really don't have anything to say about this except for, I love the way that it just rolls off the tongue. Zykevious Walker from Auburn.
Zykevious is a great name.
I can just picture on an NFL Sunday him just flattening, I don't know, Zach Wilson, and just like a thunderous call for Zykevious Walker. I'm not going to do one now because I've got a 6-year-old sleeping in the house, but it's one of those things that I can just hear some play-by-play guy just like, belting that out, and just like everybody in the living room just, flipping the table.
My kingdom for Kevin Harlan, and the dulcet tones of Kevin Harlan saying Zykevious Walker. Just get right into the baritone valley there of the Kevious. Yeah.
Excellent.
Chef's kiss.
Hey, thanks for tuning in today. I really appreciate it. I hope you had some fun hearing about the quarterbacks and the defensive linemen. If you have a thought on somebody who you think would be good, shoot me an email at mazasmusings@gmail.com. You can always hit me up on Twitter or X at mazasmusings. Love to hear what you have to say. And be sure to tune in next week for our conversation on the running backs, the linebackers, and wide receivers. I'm heading to vacation. All of you, have a great week. Thanks for listening.